you want to book acting work. We hear that, and we want you to have that. But here's the thing. The industry is desperate for leaders, for human connection. And that's what it really wants, even if it doesn't feel like that. And that's how you book work.
By taking you inside the craft, the casting room, and the business, and bringing other industry experts into the conversation, we really dig in. We pull back the curtain of the industry and show you how much power you really have as an artist. By bringing your humanity to the work and the industry, you become an artistic leader, the kind of actor who books work.
Nothing excites us more than seeing you express your unique artistic voice in the work and humanize the business.
And have all the tools you need to be a championship-level working actor at this very time in an industry that needs your voice and your leadership.
Industry and artistry. This is the only place you're going to hear this.
I'm Risa.
And I'm Steve, and this is the Acting Podcast from the BGB Studio.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to show up today here at the BGB Studio to share your stories, reflections, and insights on what it means to give and ask for consent and to create and maintain spaces in which to work. Spaces that are safe, inclusive, and protect the freest and most authentic creative and human expression in vulnerable and everyday work situations. And so in wake of the ongoing Me Too and Time's Up movements and the litany of industry professionals, many we know and have experienced ourselves, coming out as being survivors or participants in invasive behavior of any kind, we're interested, and I'm interested, and I know you're interested in continuing this conversation around consent on set, in rehearsal, in performance, in the office workplace, specific to our industry, so that we can redefine what it means to request and offer consent while doing deep creative work in storytelling, in business dealings, and in everyday life. And the work we do is it's sensitive. We're in an industry where our work is meant to be sensitive and vulnerable. And yet then we have to go into business dealings where often people express themselves, in what has been a very male-dominated industry in ways that are not quite so respectful, not quite so vulnerable, not quite so intimate. And so it's really a discussion that we want to have about what it's like to work in that, what it was like to work in that, and what the hope is for the future. So I'm going to talk about each of you individually to our audience so that they can know how incredible you are. So first, Laura Innes. I've known Laura for a long time. She's a brilliant and deeply sensitive director and actor with years of TV and theater credits, and you might just know her from her long-standing portrayal of Dr. Carrie Weaver on ER. She's directed episodes of The West Wing, for which she was nominated for an Emmy, The Affair, How to Get Away with Murder, Sneaky Pete, House, the list goes on and on and on. She's also a mother and activist focusing on the rights and protections of people with disabilities and those who identify as LGBTQ. Laurie Zaks is a TV producer, and I've known her forever. She currently works for ABC Studios as president of Mandeville Television. She's developed, produced, and overseen shows like Castle, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Everybody Loves Raymond, Veronica Mars, and so many more. She's been at an executive level at multiple huge networks over the course of her illustrious career. And full disclosure, she's also my cousin and a woman role model who I have always looked up to. Margaret Judson has had an impressive career so far, really impressive. She is an award-winning actor, journalist, and activist who began her acting career after leaving her job at MSNBC to join the writer's room as a consultant for The Newsroom and appeared in every episode of the show. She can also be seen on The Deuce and Modern Family. Margaret has contributed to CNN and The New York Times in the wake of the Me Too movement. Nick Ballard is an active BGB member here in an ongoing class. He is a Louisiana-born actor with more than 40 credits to his name. He's worked in theater throughout the United States, and you have definitely seen him in his dozens of commercials alongside his series regular role on Tyler Perry's Too Close to Home. He's also a hand model, a print model, and he lives here in North Hollywood with his wife and one-year-old daughter. And finally, Esmé Bianco. You may know Esmé from a sweet little show called Game of Thrones. She portrayed Roz for 3 seasons on the Emmy Award-winning Juggernaut, and before that, she enjoyed a successful international modeling career as well as a stint in burlesque and cabaret. In addition to acting, she is also an activist and helped write and advocate for the Phoenix Act, which extends the statute of limitations on domestic violent crimes in California. Supported by Esmé's efforts and testimony, the bill was just signed into law, which is amazing and fabulous. She is also a big part of our BGB creative community, doing extraordinary work here. Okay, so let's begin. Let's start with each of you saying a little bit about yourself so we can put a name to your voice. So tell us something that you've achieved in your work that you're proud of or known for, and something that you're excited about that you're in the midst of or have coming up. Okay, let's start with you, Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Innes, and I'm most well known for playing Dr. Carrie Weaver on ER for many years. And while on that show, I started directing on ER and on Wings, and now I do a lot of directing. And yeah.
Great, thank you.
Oh, hi. I'm Laurie Zaks. I guess what the biggest thing for me, the life-altering change for me, was getting myself onto Saturday Night Live at a very young age, and that kind of catapulted me into my life of whatever it's called, entertainment, very nonlinear life. And now I'd say that you might think this is kind of amusing, that I'm
Okay.
I'm really known for being really, really good with actors. And
say more.
Yeah. As a producer, I'm a producer now, and everybody comes to me in terms of as dealing, with actors all the time. And sometimes I'll get a phone call from, an executive at the studio and say, listen, we need you to you're the whoever it is whisperer. I have this amazing ability to get people to do things that they don't want to do, which I honed at Saturday Night Live, talking all those people into hosting when no one wanted to host the show. So, that's
a really interesting thing, and we'll get to that because you've spent time having to whisper to actors, coax actors to do things that they might not want to do, and been the voice of the studio or the network in dealing with actors, when they're working in intimate and vulnerable situations.
Yes, but I would never, let me just, in terms of the topic of this conversation, I would never, when I say I'm an actor whisperer, it's all for the good of the show. I've never asked an actor to do something that I was uncomfortable with. And yes, I've been asked to. Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it, because I can't say that's true for me.
Yeah, no, I know.
I've asked people to do things that I would never ask them to do now. We'll get to that.
Okay.
It's so honest of you to say that.
Yeah.
I've been around a long time, and it doesn't matter
the
anymore.
honesty.
Yeah.
Just admitting that.
Yeah.
But that's sort of a perfect segue. My name is Margaret Judson. I'm an actor and journalist, so I went to school for journalism and ended up an actor. I was on the show The Newsroom as a consultant and an actor in every episode. Since then, I've continued with my journalism career, and most recently, I'm really passionate about the conversation we're having today because I wrote for the New York Times a piece about intimacy coordinators. Wow. And so I published that, and now it's quickly becoming something that I really believe is my life's work.
Wow.
That's great.
We want to hear more about
intimacy.
I'll
be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Nick Ballard, an actor. Proudest moment probably would be booking a series regular off of tape. And that really changed everything. All of the work I'd done with theater and guest spots here and there, the whole process opened my eyes to the industry in a way that I was very surprised and unexpected, but should have expected, I guess. And right now I'm excited about a couple of projects to be released later in the year.
Hi, I'm Esmé Bianco. I'm an actor and activist. Probably most well known for playing Roz on Game of Thrones for 3 seasons until they killed me.
And will you identify how you were killed?
I was strung up from a 4-post bed and used as target practice by Joffrey. So I was all filled with crossbow arrows because
With very little clothes on.
with very little clothes on, more clothes than they wanted me to have on, but we'll get to that. Currently, kind of I guess it's an extracurricular activity. I'm working on the Phoenix Act, which is a bill in California to raise the statute of limitations on domestic violence, because I'm also a domestic violence survivor. So that is pretty much my full-time work at the moment. So that's what I'm doing.
Wow. Very affecting, right?
Yes, incredible.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So let me just ask you, and anybody can answer this. What does consent mean to you on the workplace, on stage, on set? What does that even mean? What comes up with the notion of what consent even is? Just to define that concept for yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's such an important question because it's so easily taken off course, especially when we start to talk about gender parity on set and the understanding of power. And that's how I would really define consent right now, as I'm thinking about it sort of intellectually, is the balance of power. So how easy it is for somebody to say yes or no and really truly advocate for themselves. So something that happened to me, so I was on, the reason I wrote the piece for the New York Times is because of an episode that I did on The Deuce. So it's on HBO, it's about pimps, prostitutes, etc. In the 70s, and so an inherently very sexual subject. And when I first signed up to even audition, I understood this as there was the potential for topless nudity. That was a negotiation I made with myself, that I was willing to do that. I wanted to work with David Simon, I wanted to work with Maggie Gyllenhaal most of all. So I write about that in the Times, and something I left out because it's tangential, but I realized is very important, is that was a very good episode of TV that I did. I made a lot of fans when I shot that. So they asked me back. And when they asked me back, they asked for more nudity. And at that point, I had everything for my reel. I made fans on set. I made I got everything I wanted to out of that. So I had power at that point. And that was the negotiation I made to myself. Now I have the power that I'm realizing now, and I didn't even realize it as I was making that decision, that now I have the power to truly consent to going forward and doing more or not. And just personally for me, I decided that I didn't want to do that. And I had the power at that point to truly negotiate that.
And how did they respond?
They weren't happy. And it was all women. And just because I really do think that we get taken off course because we start to make it a gender issue. And it was all women on the conference call that I had. So they asked me back, I was very flattered. Then the director was a woman, the producer I spoke to was a woman, my manager at the time, woman, the intimacy coordinator was on the call, woman. And the response was to, especially from one person, I felt like there was a lot of nudging, and I really stood my ground, but there was absolutely the potential. I realize now, if I hadn't felt so like, oh, I got what I needed out of this, and I can truly make a decision for myself and have my, autonomy and my own agency, I don't know if I would have felt so strongly about making such a clear decision of no for me at that time.
And I think this is Esmé. I think I like the fact that at least they had that conversation with you and gave you an opportunity to be heard. And I mean, massive kudos to you for standing up for what you were comfortable with. I very similarly was only meant to do one episode in Game of Thrones. I was meant to do one scene, and the discussion had been from the very get-go, prior to the audition, they're going to want nudity, and you have to be comfortable with that, and there'll be simulated sex, but it was within the context of this one specific scene. So which I shot, and then they asked me to come back. And the conversation was never had ever again about where my level of comfort was in terms of nudity, in terms of the type of simulated sex. And there was never that conversation. I would just get these scenes sent to me with an assumption that everything was fine. So, you know, and this was right at the beginning of my career. I'd never had a job like this before. I had no idea how to negotiate it. I had a very small agent who was predominantly a model agent who didn't have a great deal of experience theatrically. So I had like no structure or idea, really. I was completely naive to how the process worked. And of course I was on this amazing HBO show, which at the time I, you know, didn't realize was going to turn into what it turned into. So I felt like I had no choice, almost like no agency. I mean, of course I did, you know, I have to accept responsibility for myself, but no, there was never a conversation about like, where is your level of comfort with this? And I think that's really scary, because I mean, at least when I was at the position when I was doing that, I was in my late 20s. I used to be a burlesque performer, so I had all this experience of nudity and a level of confidence and comfort with that. But even so, I found it incredibly difficult, and I cannot imagine what a even younger actress who didn't have that kind of experience, like the vulnerability that you come into, you know, a show like that with, and for a conversation never to be had is just, it's really scary. So I'm so glad to hear that that happened, that was like you were an active participant in like in talking about it. But
did you get a nudity rider or anything in describing or in detail about what you were expected to do?
I would get the nudity riders like on the, and it wasn't a nudity rider so much as like a waiver where I had to basically give up my rights. And I would get that every single time they would put it in my trailer on the morning. So I wouldn't have
and you didn't know you could ask or negotiate that.
No. So, you know, it got to this stage by like season 2, I understood, you know, I had an attorney at that point. She drilled it into me. You never sign anything without me reading it first. But of course I would show up on set in Belfast, you know, 8 hours ahead in time difference than LA. And they're like, we can't have you walk onto set until you've signed that nudity waiver. Wow. So I was in a position where it's like, I either stall an entire day of shooting or I sign it and I just get on with it. And I know for a fact that nudity waiver had in it details like they could use a body double to simulate additional sex scenes and basically make it look like it was me doing that, which I'm very grateful that I'm or lucky, I don't know how you put it, that they never did that. But frankly, they didn't have to, given the extremes of what I did on the show.
I'm wondering, I'll just ask both of you, if the attitude taken by the production on the second time you went, did you ever get the sense that their attitude was a bit of entitlement where, hey, you did, you know, we gave you this show.
Yeah.
We, you know, I think that is a typical tactic. Like you did it the first time.
Right.
Totally.
Now you're a star and now you're on a hit show. Why? You know,
They use
why
it
are
as
you giving us a problem? Yeah.
I didn't feel it so much as like, look what we've done for you. I felt it more from the sense of, well, you've already done that, so why would this be an issue?
Right.
It was an assumption. And, you know, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, that I don't have any regrets about what I did and I would do it again given the chance. But the fact that those conversations weren't happening, in retrospect, is scary. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, well, this must just be the way the industry works. And if I want to be on this show, then I'm going to suck it up and deal with it.
Absolutely.
And I can deal with it. I knew that I could, but
And there was no advocate for you. There was no producer or another woman that you could speak to on the set.
Nothing. One thing I will say is that on one specific scene where I had this it was the scene that became known as the sex position scene, and it was like a very extreme scene with another woman, and the other woman was actually an adult actress, so she was way more like comfortable with and trying to push things. Talk about consent, trying to push things like during the scene that I was like, whoa, this is meant to be simulated sex. Like, hang on a second. But Dan Minahan was the director on that, and he's a wonderful, wonderful man, and had directed quite a lot of the L Word prior. And he actually arranged for us to have a rehearsal offset the day before so that we could get comfortable with what we were doing. And it was the only time that happened. And it was his suggestion, and he arranged it, and he made it happen. And I'm very glad he did. But no, there was never... no advocate. And I had a female manager. She never advocated for me. I had female agent. She never advocated. There was nobody.
Well, I think also what's happened over time is the more sex that has been on television and film, we haven't caught up with that kind of conversation.
Well, this is Laura. The thing that comes to mind as I hear you guys talk is, as a director, your job, from my point of view, has always been to protect the actor and create a zone of comfort. And now I see some of that stuff becoming sort of integrated into the structure of a place. And I know, for me, I think a thing that's very helpful is I always send out an email generally to the actors, anything that makes you uncomfortable. And then sometimes they say have a meeting, but I always say have 2 meetings. Because the first meeting, they want to please you. So they're going to, especially a guest actor. And I think that's a really important distinction between guest and starring actor. And then that third conversation, you've developed a bond with them, so you can really have the actual authentic conversation down to things that are emotional, things that are a history of abuse, things that are religious, things that are, I have celluloid here, please don't photograph this. And I think that makes that structure happen. And then once you have that structure, you can go crazy, because everybody knows the rules. But I do think it's really, really hard to be a guest and be in that position. And still, most of the time, it's a male,
Yeah,
set.
I was going to say that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I on another show of a pretty popular show, the same thing happened to me. And it was, luckily, we had a day before rehearsal. And it was something that, even in the email, when I auditioned for the part, I said, I'm not comfortable with full frontal nudity. And I had that in email, and everyone agreed. And they booked me. And then the day of the shoot, everyone just assumed that I was going to do it. And then I had to take everyone off to the side and say, hey, this is not what we agreed on. And they were just like, what? And then I go to my trailer, call my agent, and they work it out. But we had a day. And I was so happy we had that day, because if we didn't, because of the pressure, being nervous, I might have said yes to doing something I didn't want to do. It was a surprise to me that everyone just assumed that I was going to do that.
Do you think they assumed that because you're a man, or because it just was, you're on the show, you should know what the culture is here?
Yes, but the show hadn't released yet, so there were just, you only knew little bits about it. But I questioned that. Is it because I was a man?
The thing that happens on these kinds of shows, and I think I'm not defending this at all, because I did 4 years casting Masters of Sex, and we had sex all the time. We had people coming in the room to audition where they had to simulate masturbation, and we would have to tape them, and hopefully sometimes they went a little too far, but that's another story. But the fact is that I think what happens, I know what happens, is that people get so deep into their own stuff. There's, as you know, Laura, and you all know, that you're trying to make a show, you're trying to make a movie, and you just are not thinking about what those actors' needs are, because they should show up and take care of themselves, or we'll deal with this when we get there. I had so many times directors would say, what you want me to call them and talk to them about what? Well, there's a very intimate scene coming up, so you just have a conversation so everybody's on the same page. And in the rider that I created, that I wrote, beyond what the studio had, you have to explain the director, and I don't know how you would feel if you got this, Laura, but I said, you have to almost give a shot list and tell the actors how you're going to shoot them, because nobody was being responsible. Nobody was stepping up and thinking about ahead of time a show run by women who, and every time I'd say that to them, they'd go, oh, we have to deal with this again? And it wasn't that they were being ignorant or neglectful or mean-spirited about it or dismissive. They just had so many other things to do. It didn't dawn on them to to have to take care of people that way. And so, those situations come, like, of course, well, why wouldn't you, show your whole body? You have a nice body, Nick. What's the problem? I mean, why don't you just,
But you signed something. You did.
Well,
wait, did you said you weren't going to do it? And
I had it was an email. It was from the beginning, but because sometimes you get to set, you get your contract, then you go to rehearsal. You don't see your whole contract. And I did. I saw the writer afterwards, and I looked at it. It had all of those things you're talking about, and I realized they could do whatever they wanted. And
But you didn't get that ahead of time?
Well, we were in a hurry to get to rehearsal, and
Right.
so I had it.
No, I'm talking
but
about
I
like
hadn't.
a week before.
No.
But you said you made it clear to your reps.
Yes.
And then,
But they were still confused.
yeah.
But to Risa's point, I think that's why, because that's something that I was always very aware of. Like, I appreciated that nobody on set has time to do anything except take care of themselves and their own job, because everyone's always so busy. So I think the intimacy coordinators, that's so incredibly important, because that is their one and only job, is to look out for the actors and to have the conversations with it and be the advocate, so that an actor isn't trying to scramble to like make a call to their agent when when there's a 12-hour time difference. And I was very lucky that I had other actors advocate for me a lot on the set of Game of Thrones. Like, Peter Dinklage pointed out that somebody was on the half, that there was somebody hiding on the half of the set that was meant to be cleared, so that my dignity was, give me some shred of my dignity when I'm like, moving my leg across to get onto a bed while totally naked. But he shouldn't have to do that. It shouldn't be a situation where you're having to speak up for yourself in a room full of very often men, to talk about something like very intimate and private.
And something I always compare it to, just to sort of give reference, is we always have a stunt coordinator. So there should always be an intimacy coordinator.
That's a new concept. Have you ever worked, Laura, with
I
it?
never heard of an intimacy coordinator.
Really, till now?
Just this minute.
Are you serious?
Wow.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh,
I was in the
wow.
car. I heard on the radio. My wife and I just looked at each other. We were like, "About time."
Right.
I have never heard it.
here?
Never
Yeah.
heard it. But I have to say, I mean, listening to you, it makes me feel so bad, because that I consider that as a producer, that's part of my job, and it's not just to look after the women; it's to look after everybody on the show. But specifically, if there is going to be a sex scene, I'm always there. Always. Like, there was, if I'm not there, then I send somebody else there. There is no reason to ever feel uncomfortable at work, that there's no one there, for you. And yeah, everyone is doing their job, but I do believe that's unfortunate. And that's, it's just so important that somebody be there. And I have to say, and this is not all male directors, but from all the directors that I've worked with, men and female, there is a difference between male directors and female directors, at the very least in terms of sensitivity.
I have a couple things that I'll say briefly. Is like, as a director, working with an intimacy coordinator or even a producer who's speaking to the director away from me, I find very disrespectful. Because every moment of that scene is influenced by every other moment. So to have an actor come to me and they said this, I think that's really tricky.
Well,
So
aren't
what
you
about
all there
stunts?
together?
Sometimes, sometimes not.
Yeah.
So have you worked with intimacy coordinators on occasion?
I've only worked with one as an actor on stage.
Yeah.
And I found it really helpful. And I like it, but you have to be so deeply on the same page. And in terms of just one other thing, in terms of the gender of it, I've had female producers who were horrible to women and really wanted them to and really manipulative and lied. Yeah, we'll take care of you. And then doing just enough to get away with it. And then I also have worked with an older actress who had to be completely naked. I mean, she looked great, but she was in her 50s. The main actor had, whatever they call it, like a little Speedo thing, nude Speedo
Sock.
thing. Right. But he had more than that. He refused to just wear a sock. She was buck naked, and so she pulled me, and she had been, yeah, I'll do it, it's all fine. And it was a funny scene, so I was less concerned about it. But then on the day, she got really upset. We went into the bathroom in this house, and we were there for 45 minutes talking about, because she had certain things about her body from having 2 children. And I said, some dude is not going to be in here talking about this. And so, I don't know, there's all kinds of levels of protection and freedom needed.
I think the important thing is there's more of an awareness of it now.
And a
just
conversation that happens, yeah. And I love what you're saying, though, about the intimacy coordinator thing, because you don't want that person, sometimes you can let a stunt coordinator go off with the actors and do stunt stuff and then bring it back to you, but you don't want an intimacy coordinator or anybody to be representing your vision or your point of view or your relationship, your intimate relationship that you just described with your actors without you being involved with that. What is your experience with that?
I do understand what you're saying, that there is a difference between stunt work and intimate work, and I do think that's an important distinction. And also, I would argue that these are things that are physical contact, and they're something that Alicia, the coordinator on The Deuce, said to me was, your erogenous zones are the same as your fight zones oftentimes. So like your neck or your heart, or the places that are most sensitive are the ones you would go for in a fight, and they're also what you would touch to be more sexual. And so there is a ton of overlap, and to not give it the same attention would be, a dereliction. I think it is important.
I've just realized I've done mostly network TV. That's why I don't know what an intimacy is.
But even in network TV, it's starting to become.
But not to the extent of HBO.
And that's what worries me too, because we're talking about the biggest networks out there. We're not talking about independent films, student films, non-union films, where people are just getting out here. They don't know what's going on. You're not dealing with professionals that are seasoned professionals. You're dealing with people that are just going with the flow. And it scares me, because I think a lot of people are willing to say yes to anything just for a scene for the reel.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was in a horror film, and it was an independent film, but I was the lead of it, so I did have some power in it. I wasn't just a day player, and they asked me to do simulated sex, and that wasn't something that we discussed beforehand. And it was sort of on the day, here we go, what's the problem? What's the big deal kind of thing. And it wasn't something that I wanted to do. And it was actually in my contract that I wouldn't do simulated sex. And then because, it was an independent film, and it's a little bit even easier to cut corners, I felt really bullied into doing it. I ended up not. But that was a time where, oh my gosh, I wish somebody had been on set to say, here's what's in the contract. This isn't an emotional thing at this point. It's written, here it is. There's no arguing with that.
And an actor or actress should never have to make the choice between feeling comfortable at work and possibly losing their job. And, I mentioned it when Risa before said something about my death scene and how few clothes I had on. They wanted me to be, I've never told this story before, so I'm maybe I'll regret it. But they wanted me to be fully nude for that. And it was written in the script that I was fully nude. And I said to my agent, I was like, I'm not going to do it. Tell them ahead of time I don't want to do it. Because if I'm strung up there totally naked, all anyone is going to see is a dead naked woman, or a dead naked whore, actually, to be very precise and graphic about it, because that is what is going to be said. Whereas this whole, the whole point of my death scene was to show the horror of what this young king was willing to, the extent he was willing to go to, how brutal he was, how cruel he was. No one's going to be talking about that if I'm strung up there naked. So I said ahead of time I wasn't going to do it. I get to set, I walk into the trailer, and there's the nudity waiver. So I come out, we go to set for rehearsal, and I say to the director, he mentioned something about alluring to the nudity, and I said, well, I'm not going to be naked. I want you to know I'm not comfortable doing that. I told everyone ahead of time I'm not doing it naked. And he goes, oh, okay, well, and this is in front of the entire the entire crew, not a closed set. And he said, oh, well, we'll talk about it later. Okay. So the later comes, I'm back in my trailer, I'm waiting to be called to set, I get a knock at the trailer door, and it's the showrunners. And they say to me, we heard that you won't sign the nudity waiver. I said, no, I won't sign the nudity waiver, I'm not doing it naked. You want to put a dress on me and rip holes in it and douse it with blood so you can practically see through it? I don't care, do that, I'm fine with that. But if you string me up there naked, all that they're going to see is a dead naked whore, and I don't want to do it. And plus, I'm dying on the show anyway, so what have I got to lose? But that's the stage it had to get to, that I knew that I was going to be off the show, so I felt I had the power to put my foot down. If that hadn't been my death scene, you bet your bottom dollar, I wouldn't have done that.
Really?
Because I wouldn't have wanted to choose between losing my job and being naked. I mean, and I know that sounds terrible, but this was, 7 years ago now. This was long before the Me Too. This was long before these conversations were being had, and I basically had to hold up the day's shooting because they were like, well, we can't shoot until we've got your nudity waiver. And I was like, well, I ain't signing a nudity waiver. So if you're going to make me the diva that won't come out of her trailer, then so be it.
And I've heard so many stories from actresses where it's gone the other way. And they, just like you said, you're holding up the day. Like, come on, time is money. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you're a young actress on set.
And you shouldn't have to make the choice between feeling unprofessional, because that's how it made me feel. I've never shown up to set late in my entire life. I've never called in sick. I was like, don't put me in a position where I have to be the bad guy because you chose not to listen to what I was very clear about way ahead of time. And now when I can't call my agent, I can't call my manager, I can't call my attorney because they're all in LA and they're asleep.
There was a male director, right? Male director?
It was.
To male showrunners.
Yeah.
But you ended up having some cover in the end.
Yeah, in the end, I said, I'll wear the dress, you can rip the holes in it and you can splatter in it blood. And at the end of the day, I'm so glad I stuck with my guns because nobody, not one person, has ever talked about that death scene in the context of my character and what kind of character I was portraying. They talk about that scene as like, oh, that is like the pivotal moment that they hate Joffrey.
But it's just so important what you said, that it goes exactly to what the original question is what is consent? And you had the power to push back because you knew you were going to die.
That's a really important point, because you guys are both beautiful, Caucasian, educated, really profoundly sophisticated, smart women. And so for you guys to go through that journey that took so much bravery and thought, I have people on the set, it's their first job, they're people of color, they're very young, they come from some messed up home life. So gosh, those people really need it even more. I mean, everyone does, but
but they have they don't know to advocate for themselves. And just even the way you talked about the difference from the beginning to this last moment, how you started to advocate for yourself. Are there any other situations where it's not just about nudity, where it's about a certain kind of vulnerability, a certain kind of exposure? I've heard from a lot of actors of color where they're asked to do things that are, the antithesis of who they are. They feel it's stereotypical, and that's being, even though you're being beaten as a woman or a man on the ground because you're Middle Eastern or because you're black or whatever that is, and then you're being represented in ways that, again, you didn't really sign up for, but you get there, and before you know it, you're compromised.
I can't speak to the race question as much, but I do think it overlaps with the intimacy directing, because there's somebody who's always there to check in, and directors are busy and they have a lot of balls in the air, and so if there's somebody who's just consistently checking in, like you said, I didn't even have that perspective, so I'm really glad you said it, that I was lucky to get that phone call where I could say, I don't want to do this. And I wasn't even thinking of it through that lens. I didn't, get invited to another episode and then show up and there's your merkin. And so that there was somebody there. I know that conversation, hearing that and reflecting on it, I know that conversation, that conference call happened because there was an intimacy coordinator, and she knew that these are just the steps that we go through to make sure that there's full consent and understanding of what somebody's getting into. Yeah. And for the most part, I mean, my situation was extreme, but for the most part, you know, people are happy to be there, and like there's some negotiation to be had. You know, like, okay, yeah, you guys can douse it with blood and rip it up, but there's got to be something covering me. Okay, we can come to some sort of agreement. Like, I know that's
exactly. and
intimacy just that intimacy coordinators are now on set, and people are really certain people sometimes have been resistant to it and called them, for example, I've heard this one story where they were called like the sex police, and they're not there to sort of police things or make sure no sex happened. Sex is part of the human experience, and we're all there to express the human experience. Nobody's trying to like dampen that, but there's a negotiation of real world and fictional human experience that like we do need to sort of bridge that gap on, and there's somebody there to facilitate it, so it becomes sort of this no-brainer of, oh, somebody can just make our stories better, and everybody gets to be part of it
and help people have a voice. Have you ever been in that situation where you've been with somebody who's pushed too hard, a fellow actor?
Yeah.
Violence or sex or any kind of version of being asked to do something that is in a vulnerable space.
Yeah, and it goes back to your first question about consent, because I think it has to be more than just the actor, the two actors. It has to be everyone on set, because I've been in positions where I've had to be very violent with women, and the directors, sometimes they just say, hey, you can figure this out. It's like a thing that there's consent between him and I just say, early on, a director asked me to do something when I had first moved here on a TV show, and you know, it can't get too far, it's on network television, but I was young and I was like, yeah, okay, and then he comes back and he's like, don't do that, and I realized what happened was I had pushed the limit. And everyone probably said, he didn't take the blame, I don't think, but I probably took the blame for pushing it too far, but I was just listening to him, and I learned a lesson that day early. So now I put the responsibility on myself. If it's violent, if it's someone who feels uncomfortable, I just say, I'm uncomfortable. Because sometimes people don't want to speak up for themselves. And one movie, I had to rape a woman, and she was as okay with it as she could be, but in private we talk, and I felt like she was uncomfortable, so I just made it that I was uncomfortable, and it helped, because then everyone had to have the conversation. Because I've been in that position before a number of times where directors are just like, you got this, work it out, you'll figure it out, and I'm like, no, that's not how this works, man.
Well, I think certain directors are uncomfortable with sex scenes. It's not just the actor, and I know 3 instances where on sets I was on where the director came in, he didn't have a shot list, he didn't know what he was going to do, and it was just, you guys, you got it, you know, just work it out. He was clearly uncomfortable with it, because the writer, who was a woman, said, what are you talking about? You know, how can you not know, you know, what you're doing here? Because these things have to be just like a stunt. What you were saying, they have to be choreographed. And if anyone says to you, right, too. And if a director says like, yeah, you got this, you know that he just doesn't want to deal with it, or she.
I put a stop to it usually now. When I hear that kind of thing, I'm just like, no, I don't have it. I'm sorry, but I don't have it.
Direct me.
Yeah, please.
Direct me, get some coordinator in here.
Yeah. So Laura, how do you negotiate that when you're doing something that's physical?
Well, for me, I like to sort of dial in the actors and the stunt coordinator as soon as possible. And like, it's hard because nowadays you get scripts late so often. But even if I know there's a fight, I can say, okay, what's the tone of the fight? Who's involved? And then if we work together, I try to work with the stunt coordinator and not only talk about the moves, but talk about what is the meaning of the scene beyond the moves. And come up with safe words, come up with just over and over, let's do it again, where are you going to put your hands when they're on her neck, are they on the collarbone, what, you know, and to really marry those technical worlds and the emotional life of the scene, because then someone can really play full on in their face, which for both things is really where it lives, I mean, in someone's eyes. So that's helpful to me.
Yeah, I would love if there was a vocabulary for it. I believe you had mentioned that, because dancers, they know their moves, and it looks beautiful when it's done, but there's no word for a touch or a specific mood, because a sex scene is going to be sexy, and if you do it,
Is it, Nick? Is it?
hopefully, yeah, right, yeah,
Debatable.
yeah,
For the actors doing it.
but if the actors look comfortable, it's going to be sexier, maybe.
If it's meant to be, yeah.
If it's meant to be, yes. But if there were just
That's such a good
moods,
point.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, that things would have an arabesque is
It's
understood.
and
what
then
that
you
is.
can make it your
choreographed
own.
and coordinated. Yeah. But I think we forget that all of these things have to be, psychologically, emotionally, and physically, coordinated. One thing I'd love to just jump into in the midst of all this, because we are the BGB studio, we are sitting here in Studio A, where a lot of work happens, a lot of very intimate, vulnerable, physical, personal work happens. I was in class this morning, and one guy was on top of another woman, and they were making out and rolling around, and all I could think of was, please, did you guys have consent conversations out in the hallway? They know each other well, but it's really important to us, and we hear stories, and we've had situations even here where you're working on a scene in class, just like you might be in rehearsal on stage, but there's no intimacy coordinator in class. We are the intimacy coordinators, and what happens, and I know for those of you who are actors and have been in class, when there's a scene that it requires kissing, touching, any kind of act of intimacy, emotionally or not, and physical contact or pushing, or what do you do? Because I've seen actors give up their power even in class, and then walk away ashamed and regretful, and there's been no money at stake. So any thoughts or feelings about that?
Yeah, when I first started, I went to Northwestern, and then I studied Meisner, which I love studying.
Which we do a lot of here.
Yeah, but that's crazy free sometimes. So like every scene ended up with fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I want to fuck you, I want to fuck you. I mean, it was just like this constant,
Nick's nodding his
everybody
head.
was like horny 20-year-olds,
Yeah.
which was great, but it got super weird many times. And nobody was there. The teacher was in the same mindset, like, we just got to go for it. This is the art. Let's go for it. And then on top of that, you're rehearsing with people in your apartment. You don't know who they are. The scenes push buttons for those people. So here you are in your apartment, and some dude starts freaking out about how he hates women or whatever it is. And the class is sort of a mini version of the set. Because even though there's not money, there's status, there's desire, there's the teacher, there's the students who are really good actors that you aspire to be. So I think there's the same issues of power.
And hierarchy, yeah.
And I think it's so difficult especially if you're working in, with improvisation. I had a scene in class once where we were improvising, and the other male actor shoved me up against the wall.
Was that in our class?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. That's okay. But really quite violently. But he wasn't to know. We hadn't discussed it beforehand. Obviously, we're improvising is where the improv went. I feel like he wasn't being inappropriately aggressive, but it triggered me, and I didn't know what to do because I was triggered. So it wasn't even about being able to say, oh, let's stop the scene, I'm not comfortable, because I was in trauma response, which meant that I froze up and I stood still and I tried to make myself small, and I didn't say anything, because that's what you do when you're in a trauma response. So it's so difficult, because how do we have that freedom to improvise? And I have a certain amount of my shit is my shit, I have to deal with it. But at the same time, everybody has shit, no one is to know what it's linked to. And I think, oh God, maybe I've done things to trigger people in class before, and I stress out about that. And it's like, how do we get to a place where we can have creative freedom, but we can, when you're not able to have those conversations ahead of time, what?
We have to have them ahead of time.
Yeah.
But Esmé, we have to have them ahead of time, especially going into either a Meisner repetition round or an improv where you don't know even what's on the page. You have to have those conversations ahead of time and say this is safe, or have a safe word, or something where people are just understanding what the boundaries are.
I love this idea of the safe word, because you can, even if you're in trauma response, you can say a word.
Oh my God, yes.
Even at that point, you can go, pineapple, heffalump, whatever it is.
And sometimes you can tell people, because you want the scene to be so viscerally great, but if you see it going there as a director, you might say, put that into another gesture. You move away from her then. You cannot go towards her. But don't lose that mojo, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a structure, too.
Yeah, yeah.
I try to treat it as if I'm on set. Even if a scene is improvised and I want to kill this person, this guy, I'm not going to punch him no matter what. On a set, I'm never going to punch him. I'm never going to kiss another woman if that's not what's been agreed upon on set. So I try to treat class like that. We're going to have a conversation. And if we didn't, no matter where it goes, like you said, whether it's into another action or something, just don't go there. And it's pretty amazing where you can get mentally, and that you can learn a lot from that. Withholding that aggression, physical violence.
And also dealing with what's underneath all
Yeah.
that, because again, there's usually something else that's happening that's triggering that kind of aggressive response. So what does that look like? But these conversations in class, before class, have to happen, and we're trying to be vigilant about that here, so that those kind of traumatic experiences don't happen, or people don't misunderstand each other and act inappropriately, behave aggressively or inappropriately.
And imagine everybody has different triggers.
Well, this is the thing. Exactly. And it can be something for one person they're completely fine with, and something for and it might seem like a benign situation that you're like, oh, you know, I only gave her a bit of a shove, but, or, you know, whatever it is, you know, I only stroked his hair, I only did this, that, and the other, but we don't know exactly. We don't. Everyone has boundaries in different places.
Creating these boundaries they're not boundaries to stop the creative work or the connection. They're actually to create a safe enough space so that, like you were talking about that, Laura, when you're working with actors on set, so that people actually have the freedom then to express themselves, knowing what those boundaries and structures are, and there's safety and freedom in those structures. And so that's so important that we have to remember in all the work we do. We don't do that here for that very reason, which is ask people to go work with each other at home outside because of those things that happened to me when I was in New York very young, and I wasn't an actor. I was in an acting class as a director, but I went to some guy's house who was my scene partner, and he went after me physically, and I had to run out the door, and it was traumatizing. And I told Steve when we started this studio, I said, nobody goes to anyone's apartment in this work. But if you're listening to this and you are required to do that and do outside work, try to find a safe space and have those rules identified before you walk in somebody's space or apartment. Always say ahead of time, this, especially if you're going to be doing an intimate scene with no supervision and no guidance and no boundaries, it can get risky. So not only do I not advocate, we don't advocate for that, but also if you do that, have those rules and boundaries that are super important to you. And whether you're in class, in an audition, in rehearsal, whether you're dealing with a class scene partner or with someone you think is in a power position, which is often imagined, and feeling pressure to do something you're not comfortable with, you have to look at your part in it and not make yourself small or powerless, you know?
Yeah. Well, my question is, when you're talking about people who have maybe from the top, asked for something, what is their motivating factor? Or I don't want to put you on the spot, but you said that sometimes you've asked for something that maybe you wouldn't ask for anymore. What motivated you to do that? Was it when in the beginning when you said, there have been times when I've asked people?
Oh, yeah. Well,
I mean, it's your body.
I mean, some dark nights of the soul there, when I would, working on the doors, I'll say this, I have no problem with it. And I'm being asked.
You were working with some rough
rough cats. Yeah,
rough
I have a
directors.
story about that.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Everyone's got their door story. But, I'm being asked, like, I got called in the middle of the night to come down to set to go into a trailer and ask a woman, she has to do a blowjob scene and she didn't really understand that. Could you just convince her to do the blowjob scene? And I got out of bed and went and did it.
And
gave her
you
money.
wanted to make.
I'm not proud of that, but I did. And
I'm so glad for you to say that. It's just helpful to hear you
because
say
I
that.
was drinking the Kool-Aid, and it's not that I didn't. I mean, on that same movie, I would argue about how to portray women and how to do better in how the women were portrayed and how the Meg Ryan character was portrayed, even though it was a real person and fought for the voice of the women in that story, but. I don't know why I did those things. I just thought it was my job. I thought it was my job.
You didn't even think about it. You didn't even think to question.
That's the thing, and that's we have to take responsibility for the things that we saw, the things that we allowed, all that stuff.
You weren't conscious of it. I mean, we did a pilot together where the producer, somebody who I was working for, was asking to meet with the actresses privately, and I didn't think anything of it, sending these.
But you and I had an argument about that. Yeah,
I don't even remember. Yeah. But what was I arguing? Just leave
it alone. Usually, Risa just leave it alone.
Yeah. And it's you just don't. It didn't even cross my mind, things that I had heard and seen.
I ask that and appreciate the honesty, just because I think it's really important to the conversation, the evolution, to understand sort of where we came from and where we're going.
Would never in a million years ever think to allow for that again, ever.
But hearing you say that, it takes, because I have, I've dealt with my own fair share of shame about, not that I'm ashamed of what I did, and I'm very glad I did it, but at the same time, like, you carry this burden of like, well, what kind of example was I setting to other actors, and and as you carry this shame about some of the things offset that you've endured, and some of the meetings I've taken where I'm like, dear God, like, what was I thinking? Like, what an idiot, and I blame myself for it. And but then knowing that, like, that on all levels of the industry there are people who have who've gone along with behavior that wasn't acceptable because they felt that it was their duty, their job, they're just part of the expectation.
But even when it happened to, to me personally, and, the thing with it happens on all levels. And
right.
I do think that, you're embarrassed. You're, you're ashamed. It's like,
you don't know what to do.
Yeah,
you don't know what to do about it.
You think you're doing the right thing. You're playing the game. That's what we're taught, And
sometimes it doesn't even feel like a game. It just feels like, either you don't have the voice or agency, or that you don't know you don't even know how bad it is until later.
Unfortunately, I've talked to a lot of actors, and you hear, man, this Me Too thing, can't say this, can't say that, and it's usually actors talking to male actors, talking to other male actors, and then I have to. You don't want to argue because that's not going to help them. See, that's a tough thing for me because I don't know how to talk to them. I'm not on their side, but I also want to let them know, hey, what you're wrong. So it's really hard because a lot of actors still think, they're like, you don't know what's true or what's not. Let's just think it's true then, buddy. But you can't say that because then you're like, oh, you're not on my side, and it's tough.
One thing you can always say, which is a little bit not pushing it aside, but you can say, but there's a conversation happening, and we all have to just be in the conversation. We all have to be in the awareness of it, and it's going to be uncomfortable because I know so many, for a lot of men and for women, nobody knows what to say anymore, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and it becomes paralyzing, but at least to say, but there is a conversation now, and that's what this is about.
And that's what I usually say. I say, well, it's not a bad thing. What's happening is not a bad thing. Like, yeah, I guess so. Usually is their response. But it's like, in your heart it's not a bad thing.
Well,
but you're just frustrated.
I will say I still have a fair number of male directors who I've known for a long time, so they feel really comfortable with me, and we're at the GGA or something, and they go, I'm happy for you guys, but it really sucks for me.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm just getting on my feet, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah, I feel really bad.
But it's human nature. I mean, everyone loves doing this. And that's sort of the motor for the manipulation to a certain degree, because, gosh, we're so lucky to do it. We love it so much. So it's really hard to walk away. And honestly, I'm in a different position because, I've got my nest egg. I have my life. It's stable. It's ready. So I can walk away from anything.
What do we have to do, each of us, all of us, to perpetuate and create change in how all of this functions: consent, vulnerability, safe and supportive workplaces among men and women?
This could be ambitious, but I would love if film schools or theater schools introduced a class on consent. General education, something like the coordinator on these sets, just to teach people coming up, young people, how to deal with other people, men, women, in every situation. But there needs to be an understanding between everybody. It can't be someone who just says, you guys will get it. And if we were taught that from a younger age, just like, what camera you're going to use, the lighting, things like that, I think it would benefit everyone.
I think what really comes to mind as we're telling these stories is just diversity of power, because I think that balances any sort of situation, that you have, diverse power structure so that it doesn't all rest on one type of person who has one specific perspective. And I know that now stars are more often putting in their writers that there needs to be this percentage of diversity in this specific way that they are advocating for. And to be honest, from the stories that I've heard, I haven't personally experienced that, but from the stories that I've heard of people who have been on sets like that, is that it is a little bit rockier when there are people who haven't had as much exposure, as much experience, but it's for the ultimate goal of getting those people experience so that they can move up through that power structure. It creates, a more diverse power structure.
And I would just reiterate what I said earlier, that from behind the cameras, that every time there is an opportunity to make a change or to fight for something, even if it's the smallest little thing, the smallest little characteristic in a character, or to fight for somebody you really believe in, to just take it, because every little bit is going to have some repercussion.
Yeah, and I guess my 2 cents would be it's changing a lot. It hasn't changed enough. I think creating your own material, I think meeting with other writers, other directors, how did this go for you? And creating this connection and this sort of foundation. So when you are in the heat of battle and everyone's ready for you to fall on your face or cry or whatever, that hopefully you have some fortitude to get through it. And
And I think sort of following on from that, and like what I mentioned earlier, was trying to remember in the craziness of the industry and the competitiveness of it and all of that, that we're human beings, and when you can, and I recognize we're not at a stage where you can always do this, but using your voice for somebody, especially somebody else who hasn't been able to find their voice, or is like that one person who's saying something, like backing them up, like you said, just being that one person that goes, I'm gonna support my female co-star by saying I'm not comfortable either, because then I know that she's gonna get what she needs. And I think those little things are gonna work.
And that can also be
it's a great thing to do, to support the woman.
And it can also be the background artist or the craft person or the animal trainer. Or you see somebody, you constantly see people, if they get a chance, they're going to get in there and, try to get something going. So you have to be, everyone has to be culturally on the same page,
and sometimes
ideally.
it only takes one person. Because most of the time people know what they're doing is wrong. And just one other voice can make a huge difference.
Thank you all so much for participating in this. If you have any other thoughts, let us know. And let's just keep having this conversation. I think what I'm learning out of this is just to keep having this conversation, not to be afraid of it. I love the notion of slowing down and remembering that we are human beings trying to do creative work in vulnerable spaces that really requires us to show up and remind other people what that looks like, so that we can get back to the work we love and the stories that we want to tell, and not to get caught up in all of the other things where the train is just moving too fast.
Yeah. And that the other side is not the other side, quote unquote, because they're not the other side. But they're not the enemy. And sometimes if somebody feels that way, they get even more sort of puffed up and it gets worse. So
it often comes from fear. Yeah. A lot of this comes from fear and not knowing what to do. And so we all know it. And it is maybe feels like a very male thing, but I know that it happens to me sometimes, where when you feel afraid, you get aggressive or you get defensive, right? And when you see that in people, and I would say that to the audience and to all of us, just to keep remembering, to look somebody in the eye and to say, I'm right with you. We're doing this together. I get it. I feel you. And let's try to figure this out and remember, idea that we're all trying to actually, like what you said, Laura, which I loved, like, let's remember that we're trying to tell this, sometimes in very emotionally fragile story. And if we all pay attention to that and have a language for that, then we'll be able to work more efficiently and rise to new heights. So here's to that. Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love sharing this content with our community. We offer it 100% free, and it's our privilege to do so. If you're loving this podcast and are interested in offering something in return, go ahead and subscribe to the Acting Podcast. Then find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen to your podcast and leave us an honest rating and review. Your words will help us bring this work to even more actors and artists around the world.
Thank you so much for listening and for being here with us. We love how this community shows up for us and for each other, online and in the studio. And as a thank you to our incredible community, we want to give you an amazing free gift. It's called the Comprehensive Guide to the Perfect Self-Tape.
So all you have to do is screenshot your review, send it to theactingpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll send you an exclusive gift of the Perfect Self-Tape Guide to take your work to the next level.
And come visit us online at thebgbstudio.com. And if you're in LA, Atlanta, or New York, jump into a class with us. We're here to get you into the kind of shape necessary to be successful.